So good morning, everyone. My name is Doug Maines. I'm a partner in the Lansing office of Honigman, where I run our cannabis and hemp industry group. We're obviously headquartered here in Detroit, and our CEO, David Fulton, is on the board of directors for the Detroit Chamber. So if you see him at any point in time in the next couple of weeks, please tell him I did a great job on this, because it's year-end review time. So we've heard a little bit today about how we got where we're at, what kind of the opportunities and issues with the current market are. I get a little bit more fun piece. I get to kind of talk about where we're going, kind of what policies and changes in legislation and rules we may be seeing kind of in the short term and also the long term. So I want to start, I know we're supposed to be talking about Michigan, but wanted to start by talking about the federal level, what's going on there. And I know, obviously the Safe Banking Act has come up several times today. And this is obviously for anybody who's in the industry, anybody who's a service provider, an attorney in the industry, this is the number one question we get. Where can I bank? And as we've heard, there's about 3 or 4 kind of small banks, credit unions across the state who will kind of openly do business with this industry, but they do charge a premium. So, the Safe Banking Act would fix that, would really kind of open this up to a lot of other financial institutions to get in. I'm a little less sanguine than some of the other kind of speakers in terms of predicting when and if this might pass. I know it's sitting in the Senate right now in Congress. I don't see it going anywhere, just with kind of the tone and tenor of things that are happening at the federal level right now. And as someone who used to work in the Michigan legislature, I just think it's probably too soon to have, purely marijuana bills passing the legislature. I think what we'll see, probably what I've always wagered on, is that this would kind of be a rider that goes into an appropriations bill, kind of like what we saw with the Rohrabacher Amendment, kind of what we saw with hemp and the Farm Bill, where there's a much broader bill out there, and this is just kind of something that's tucked in that, even if you don't agree with it, you can kind of say, there are 100 things in the bill, I liked 99 of them, I had to deal with this in order to get those 99. So I think we're probably still a few years away from that. You've got the States Act out there. This one I think has absolutely zero chance of going anywhere. This is the strengthening the 10th Amendment through Enforcement Act. It's co-sponsored by Elizabeth Warren, which I think is important, kind of a little bit of insight into what an Elizabeth Warren presidency may do. This would basically amend federal drug laws to say that if your state law allows possession or cultivation or a commercial market, the federal government won't interfere with it. And speaking of presidential candidates, Bernie Sanders a few weeks ago issued kind of his plan of what would happen to the cannabis industry if he were elected president. So he has said within his first 100 days, he will issue an executive order that legalizes marijuana across the country. He had some other interesting kind of points in there. Specifically, he was going to try to focus the industry on nonprofits and do whatever he could to ban big tobacco from getting involved. The last two here are hemp related. So obviously last year in December, Congress passed the 2018 Farm Bill, which effectively legalized hemp across the country and also cannabinoids as long as it's under 0.3% THC. The interim draft rules just came out yesterday. So that remains to be seen kind of how states are going to interact with those rules. And then the other kind of piece there is FDA regulation. So the Farm Bill specifically allowed the FDA to continue to have some jurisdiction over hemp. And shortly after that bill came out, the FDA came out and said you can't have basically edibles and you can't make any sort of health claims when it comes to hemp. So we're still waiting on kind of more FDA guidance on when they might allow those products or what sort of rules and regulations they'll have surrounding those. So then turning to Michigan, and we'll start with medical, what kind of policy changes might we see? So I know Matt was just talking about this up here. When does this industry become self-sustaining? This is the number one complaint I hear from my retail clients is that there's just no product out there. I've got to call in every favor I've got in order to get what little, flour and product I can on my shelves. So, as Matt mentioned, there's still caregiver product coming in, even though that's, blatantly illegal under state law. You still have some facilities that are licensed or operating even though they're unlicensed. So, this may be something that we start to see policy changes coming around in the future to kind of rectify the situation and to really make this industry able to stand on its own. The second point there is something we're starting to hear more and more about. Tribes want to get into this. And, we've got a lot of businesses, our clients, who want to work with tribes. Obviously, there's some issues there in terms of jurisdiction, in terms of sovereignty, how that works. There's some rumors that, the state may be starting to work on a compact like we have with gaming that would work with the tribes, that would allow them to, have a similar system to Michigan and interact with Michigan's medical marijuana system without kind of giving up tribal sovereignty. But that could be several years in the making. In the meantime, we may be looking at some sort of policy changes. Right now, under the MMFLA, you have to be operating in a municipality that has allowed these types of facilities. And the definition of municipality doesn't include tribe, so maybe there's a change there that might be coming. These last two are a little bit more business oriented. M&A activity in this space right now is huge since the state changed the law in March or April of this year to really allow publicly traded companies to get in. We're seeing a lot of merger and acquisition activity. And this is more of a local policy change. The state, I think, has adjusted well to this. The problem is at the local level. Every municipality is a little bit different. Certain municipalities, like the city of Detroit, has been very good about kind of changing possession or ownership through the use of special land use permits. But a lot of municipalities aren't there yet. So they either don't allow any transfers of licenses, don't allow any changes in the ownership structure of licenses. So there's a lot of ways that you have to get kind of creative to do this. And frankly, this isn't an industry that we're seeing right now. A lot of people try to get into and say, this is going to be my family business for the next 3 generations. We're seeing, people get in, they want a 5 to 10 year turnaround. Inevitably, this is going to be legal at the federal level. I want to sell out when, big tobacco, big pharma, or some multi-state operator comes in and wants to buy me out. So that can be a little bit difficult depending on what municipality you're in and what their rules are regarding transfers and changes in ownerships to entities. The other piece there, secured lending. This is another thing that we're starting to hear. I've heard a couple of speakers today say this. Basically, you don't get traditional bank financing. So you've got to go to kind of alternative methods. And one of the things we hear a lot from, and we represent one of the largest lenders in the country. They've written about, $500 million in this space. It's always, what can we take as equity? And what we kind of tell them is what can we take as collateral? And what we tell them is you can take equity in the business, you can take inventory, you just can't ever foreclose on that unless you want to go through the licensing process. So this is something that I was talking to one of our multi-state operator clients the other day. They're starting to see in other states are, kind of realizing that this is an issue and maybe kind of crafting policy solutions that allow, a short-term kind of where you can take legal possession to inventory or to a business while you're trying to sell that kind of under almost a guardianship or a conservatorship that's run by the state regulators. Same way with, one of the things we're going to start seeing as we kind of mature into the business cycle is bankruptcy. So you can't get bankruptcy protection at the federal level as a cannabis business. So, people kind of coming in who want to be a little bit of a turnaround artist. When a cannabis business is suffering, they want to come in and try to right the ship or to just sell off the pieces and the assets as they can. Right now, they'd have to go through the full licensing process. So, maybe a policy change that looks at, is there a better way to do that? Is there kind of a way we can expedite that in order to turn these businesses around? And then talking about MRTMA, the Adult Use Statute, and I apologize, I think my voice is starting to go a little bit. I've been suffering from a sinus infection the last couple of days. But we've heard, obviously Friday they're going to start accepting applications for adult use facilities. Eligibility, generally for the first 2 years, the only people who can apply for most of these licenses are people who already have a full medical license. So you've got a smaller pool of people who are already eligible to apply. When will we see operational facilities? I know, Kathy was asking about when we'll see sales. Under the law, the state has 90 days to either approve or deny a license. So we could see, or we should start seeing some of the first licensed facilities by February of next year. When those sales occur, I think at this point is anybody's guess. So kind of the biggest hurdle, and we've heard this already, is where to locate. Obviously, I think we're probably about a dozen municipalities across the state that have fully opted in, a few more pending, but it's still a very small number. One of the things we're starting to see, a lot of people are coming to us about ballot initiatives. What can we do through the ballot initiative process to basically force municipalities to opt in. We did the Pontiac ballot initiative last year under the medical. We've got 3 that are up in November. So, that's something that, I think people are using that as a little bit of a tactic to kind of force municipalities to come to the table and to say, basically, if you don't work with us, this is going to the ballot. It'll probably pass. And then generally when you pass something via ballot initiative, you can't change it for several years. So, you're going to get locked into something you may not want, so come to the negotiating table with us. So one of the reasons we see, or a few of the reasons, is that municipalities are very confused. So they're not opting in right now, and I think there's a couple of points here. Under the MMFLA, it's very clear municipalities can limit the number and type of facilities that they want in their jurisdiction. Under MRTMA, the language is just that you can limit the number. So I think I've talked to a lot of municipalities that have said, does that mean I can just say 5? Or does that mean I can say 5 retailers and 5 growers? So that's one of the questions we're hearing. Also, this idea under MRTMA, it also says you can't pass an ordinance that prohibits medical facilities from co-locating with adult use facilities. So we're hearing from a lot of municipalities that are saying, well, we've allowed medical. Does that mean everybody who's got a medical license already is just absolutely, 100% allowed to go ahead and get a medical license, because to do otherwise would be an ordinance that would prohibit them from co-locating. So that's another piece. And then also, they have to have a competitive process if they limit the number of licenses that they're going to award, which a lot of these municipalities have already awarded their medical licenses. What they'd ideally like to do is just say, you got a medical license, fine, we're also gonna give you a recreational license, but how do you do that while still having a competitive process? So I think that's why one of the reasons we've seen so few of these municipalities opt in at this point. And then, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, some of the speakers were, how are the medical and adult use systems going to interact? There's some language in the rules that would allow medical facilities to sell their product into the recreational market for a period of time under certain circumstances. The department has said, as of right now, they don't really have any plans to do that. So how's that going to work? That their main focus is the state's medical marijuana patient population, that they feel like their obligation is to provide product to those individuals because they're using this for medical reasons, and that the recreational market is really secondary to that. So the idea is, let's make sure we get as much product in the medical side as possible without harming that to get to the recreational. And then I met with the director of the department a couple of weeks ago, and he said probably within the next couple of weeks we'll see the draft of the permanent rules for recreational marijuana. So, that'll give us a little bit more of an insight into what we're looking at in this industry. The other piece here is hemp and CBD. Obviously, this is huge right now with the passage of the Farm Bill. You're seeing CBD products everywhere, from Kroger to CVS to Nordstrom's. Right now in Michigan, we're operating under the 2014 Farm Bill. That should be changing. So now that the USDA has put out its rules under the 2018 Farm Bill, eventually Michigan will have to submit a plan to the USDA, and then the USDA will sign off on that and say, yes, your plan complies with all of our rules and regulations. Go ahead and create a regulatory system here. So, our hemp cultivation system in Michigan may be changing. And then one of the other things that I think, and I've had discussions with the Michigan Department of Agriculture about this, there is a statutory conflict between, we've got 2 laws on hemp right now. So MRTMA addresses this, and then we have the Industrial Hemp Research and Development Act. So basically, as I read this, under the Industrial Hemp Research and Development Act, anybody who's selling CBD needs to be licensed by the state. But I'd be willing to wager money that your Krogers and your Walgreens and your Nordstroms are not going out there and getting a license right now. That conflicts with what I would say is in MRTMA, which says, notwithstanding any other law, basically the transfer of industrial hemp, which would include CBD, is not a penalty. It's not something that needs to be regulated. So I think there's an inherent conflict there between the 2 of those, and whether or not you need a license if you're selling any sort of CBD or hemp-based products. So that's something that I would anticipate there'd be some clarity on, and maybe some legislative changes. Finally, just a couple other issues to watch, and I want to kind of wrap up quickly to allow some time for questions if there's any. Obviously, one of the things we're hearing a lot about right now is vaping. This is a problem. Governor Whitmer issued some emergency rules that prohibited the sale of flavored nicotine vape devices. But as we're starting to see kind of across the country, it's not really the nicotine-based vaping products that are causing all of the problems that we're reading about in the newspapers. It's THC-based vaping. So it would not surprise me if we see rules, regulations, legislation introduced coming in the coming months or years that deals with THC vaping and tries to regulate that industry. Impaired driving, I know this has come up today. You're talking about, we're all familiar. 0.08 BAC, that's the legal limit. We're all very familiar with that. The problem is there's just not a corollary out yet for marijuana. We're still in the process of kind of learning how the body metabolizes it, how it kind of impacts your driving and decision making. So this becomes a problem that law enforcement has brought up, and it's also a problem relatedly to the labor question of when you come to work, if you have marijuana in your system, at what point are you impaired? So that's another issue that I think we'll start to see. There was a work group that was formed several years ago that issued a report here in Michigan earlier this year that basically said there wasn't enough science out there to create kind of a per se limit where somebody was intoxicated while driving. But we've got some pilot programs that are going out there right now looking at roadside saliva-based drug tests and kind of trying to figure out what those numbers might be. And then finally, regional cooperation. This was interesting. I did a presentation in Chicago last week with the legal counsel for Governor Cuomo out of New York. Interestingly, a couple of weeks ago, they had a summit with the governors of New York, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, and they're planning to sit down and come up with a regional cannabis plan. They would like it so all 4 of those states kind of adopt the exact same medical marijuana laws so that they've got kind of unified interests there, which I think is an interesting concept and something that I would imagine that kind of more states, as they come into this in a regional way, start to look at those types of issues of Michigan and Ohio or Illinois as people come online. How are our states going to interact, and how do we make sure that people aren't kind of flooding the Ohio market with marijuana from Michigan and vice versa? So those are just a couple of the issues top of mind that I think are out there. And with that, I've got about 3 minutes, so I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. Yes, Senator.
Coleman Young Consulting. Thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you. Coleman Young Jr., Coleman Young Consulting. I just had a question. You were talking earlier about the vaping process. You were saying that a lot of that is because of the THC products. Is that because it's the THC alone, or from what I also heard that they pack a lot of other things in there and then throw the THC on top of that? Could you just explain that to me a little bit?
Yeah, my understanding, and by no means an expert in this, is that it's the black market THC products. It's the real problem there is not just that it's THC, it's what's added. It's the vitamin E acetate. It's other things that when they're combusted really cause problems. So I think, but mostly from everything I'm reading, it's not kind of the nicotine, it's more the THC base that are causing issues.
Thank you.
All right, if there are no questions, thank you all very much.
I want to thank Douglas. We've heard from a lot of lawyers today. Regrettably, I'm one as well, but I won't talk about the law. I will simply thank you all for coming. Couple things. There's open networking afterwards, and I strongly suggest, there are investors in the room, there are operators in the room, there are accountants, there are lawyers. So very healthy as it relates to resources for the space in the room. So I encourage you all to stick around and during the networking session. Secondly, and very important, the Chamber is going to be sending out a survey to get your feedback on what transpired here today, but additionally, what you'd like to see in the future as we continue to embrace this industry in our 11-county region that we cover. So every participant will get a survey. I encourage you all to fill it out because it will only help us do this better. A shameless plug, I think that, if you're not a member of the Chamber, you should join. We have particular rates for smaller businesses. And a couple very significant upcoming events in January is our Detroit Policy Conference, where those of you that participated last year know that we had a significant cannabis industry participation by way of a panel at that conference. And, of course, in May is our Mackinac Policy Conference, which you cannot attend unless you're a member. So thank you for being here. Stick around. make some contacts, and we look forward to keeping in touch with you.